welcome back to the Adaptive Leadership Summit. I am filling in for Peyton and Andrea. I'm the content director at NewBreed Training. My name is Brooks Hammond. And for those of you that were on earlier, you know that Peyton and Andrea had to leave. Their daughter had an accident and looks like she will be okay. So that's good news. But this session, we're with Mindy Caliguire, and I'm really excited for this session. Mindy is one of my favorite people. She's just a wonderful person. She's the founder of Soul Care, which is a spiritual formation ministry that exists to increase soul health in the body of Christ. She's in senior leadership at Glue, and she's worked with Spire, Stadia, Willow Creek, Salvation Army, all kinds of things. She has a ton of books that you need to go pick up. And I also have to say, I've had the opportunity to interact with some of her family members. Her son works at a Christian ministry and is just wonderful. Her whole family is wonderful. And so, Mindy, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Brooks. I think that was a surprise. Did you and I talk about that you had gotten to know one or both of my sons that work there?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
That was a sneak thing. You just snuck that up on me. Which is it, Jeff, that you've interacted with? Fabulous. Great. Well, he's a superstar for sure. Amazing, amazing young man. Well, hey guys, I'm glad to be with you. And I understand you've already had a lot of great information coming in about adaptive leadership and about how it has to emanate from our life with God and our soul, I would say. Before we get started, I have a bunch of ideas for where we're going to go today and some slides that I'll be sharing along the way. But I'd love to hear from you all, or at least some of you, if you're in on the chat. And you can, Brooks, they can chat in here, right? It looks like we've got, I don't know, a little under 20 folks on the call right now. I would just love to hear maybe just a shout out of what city you're coming in from, and I'll tell you where I am as well. And I'll actually show you a little bit because it's kind of a fun show and tell here. But I would also love to know just any high level, like, how are you coming into this session from the last one? What were some maybe ahas or anything like that? I just want to make sure we have a great continuity for your experience. So if you can, Brooks, they have the ability to hop in on chat, right? Mm-hmm. All right, here's somebody from California. Great, thank you. And awesome. Point Claire, is that Quebec?
Yeah.
Excellent. From Zimbabwe, welcome, welcome, welcome. Fabulous. Yeah, the first question is the easy one. Where are you calling in from? And while a couple more of you type in on that, I am in Boulder, Colorado, and it's sort of in the central part of the US, but I'm looking out at the Rocky Mountains right now, which is just fabulous, and really blessed to be in this really nurturing and soul-filling environment. But straight across from where I'm looking right now, I don't know if you could see this on the screen, is also interestingly a stand of trees. I don't know if you can see it over there, that's been completely burned. So the fires that made at least headlines in the US at the end of December, well, I guess you can see it in some of the trees that are right in front of me too, have been completely burned out. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, it's a very sobering reminder of what happens when we get burned out. It's a living reminder, or a not so living reminder, of how what it can feel like. There's a whole grove of trees that are completely burned out over there, and I call it the Garden of Desolation. And it's a place where we're going to create a reflection environment for leaders to just come and sort of sit in the ache and the actual achy beauty of things that have been so severely burned, and how do we encounter God in those spaces and find hope. Dennis, thanks for writing. You're entering this session appreciating the insights. Good. You're in a soul-filling season of ministry. Man, that's awesome to hear. Love it. Love it. May your tribe increase. Yes, Isaiah 61:3. Out of the ashes, is that what that is? Hope will arise. That's something we are absolutely clinging from or to in this season, and we're finding to be the case. One leader, very senior leader, was with us out on the land here maybe a week and a half ago, and went into that. And I was just talking about this garden of desolation and the beauty of these trees and whatever, and he got super quiet and ended up telling my husband and I about the loss of their grandchildren recently, in utero, but far enough along in the pregnancy that their daughter had to do a full, delivery of these two precious babies. So there are just things, sometimes we see them coming, sometimes like that we never do, but places where our souls just need to feel the sadness and feel the loss and feel the grief. And it was a very healing time. We prayed with him and for him, and just beautiful how the Lord meets us. And yes, how out of ashes, the ashes don't get erased. They're still there, but out of those ashes, hope will arise. Well, thanks for a couple of you who chimed in there, others who are maybe feeling a little more quiet. I just want to start out our session. I'll be sharing my screen a little bit, but just in a high level, talking about where we're going to go. So Rich walked you through some of the different ways that the soul, it sort of manifests under anxiety and how that shows up in our leadership. And so glad, Dennis, that that's not exactly where you're at right now, but these are just parts of being human. This is parts of being human. And I think we all know the level to which the new sort of sources almost of stressors in our life is just, it's all new. We have a war going on in our world that is tragic and sad. We have ongoing threats with COVID, and we have increased in the US, violence and guns. And it's a heavy, I was just reading another article, maybe you guys have seen it as well, about the teen suicide crises. There's just so many things going on that, and anyone with a pulse, of course, cares about these things, but anyone in ministry not only cares, but sort of carries that weight of, Lord, how do you want us to be involved in this? How can we be your hands and feet into these very real crises? And that's a privilege, but can also feel burdensome to us. And so in this session, knowing that leadership comes with anxiety, that it shows up in our bodies, that we need ways of, and God invites us into ways of shouldering the yoke that he's given us in a way that the burden could feel easy and light, which in many seasons of my own leadership was not the case. And so learning how to care for your soul, that's the frame I would put around it, in the midst of leadership is just vitally important, vitally important. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'll kind of trace us through a couple quick things about the soul and why, from a biblical perspective, the soul is really the thing that's integrating all the dimensions of your personhood, and why it's so important for us to pay attention to the well-being of the soul. But then most importantly, our session will give you some opportunities to enter into some practices, which feels weird on a digital Zoom environment, but I've been doing this now for 2 years, and I can report that wherever you are right now in front of your computer screen, the Lord is also with you, and we can enter into some spaces of reflection together. And the goal of doing that while we're together is, just even from an adult learning standpoint, never mind the activity of the Holy Spirit, when we experience a thing together, it's one of the best ways for our bodies to learn, our minds and bodies to learn the things that we can do when we're not together. So that's my hope for that as we were planning into this session. So I'm going to share my screen and walk us through some slides. So are you able to see that?
Yep, we can see that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so this whole idea of soul care and what myself, our team at soulcare.com, the folks that we have spiritual directors and coaches, and myself and others who are all committed to doing what we can to come alongside leaders in a way that helps restore life and health and vitality to the human soul, to the leader's soul. And the title for our session is really, how do you become a leader that can withstand change? And anyone that's been in leadership for more than 2 minutes knows that change becomes the norm. So if we're relying on something being constant or stable as the source of our internal stability, we're going to set ourselves up for some really hard things. Just to anchor the ideas that we're talking about in scripture, and sort of like, why is the soul so important? I love looking at Jesus's words in Matthew. I can kind of stop sharing screen and we can just talk through this for a second. But you know, the Matthew records this, I don't think one of the most, famous rhetorical questions of all time from Jesus, saying, how could we possibly benefit if you gained the whole world but forfeited your soul? Or what could you give in exchange for your soul? And if we pause and say, how did we ever get here to the point where leaders and so many of Jesus's people are vacuous in terms of our own soul health? I'm glad that's not the case for Dennis in California, but many of the people I talk to come into a session like this, or into other retreat experiences or conferences, just gasping for air. The leadership struggle is just so real. And so and that was my own journey. My husband and I were church planting in Boston, and I was living in a way that was, faithful, dutiful, leveraging my spiritual gifts, doing all the things you're supposed to do. And I had physical symptoms that just sidelined me for a season because of the deep unhealth in my own soul. But I didn't have a rhetoric or an imagination for why the care of my soul would matter. Sort of the main idea was like, if you're saved, then your job is to work as hard as you can to help as many other people as you can also become saved, so that we fulfill the Great Commission, which sounds great, sounds really good. And for many of us, that's been our operating model for many, many years in ministry. But if you were to look out at the body of Christ, as I have now for decades, and see the level of deep unhealth, yes, some of those examples make terrifying and sad national headlines, but far below the headlines, the norm in many people's lives is that their service to God has absolutely cut off and almost entirely destroyed their own inner life with God. And this is not a terribly new phenomenon. Henry Nouwen, from a Catholic perspective, was noticing this decades ago, saying that, nothing conflicts with, I think, love of Christ like service to Christ. I think that was his quote. But the idea that so many, the leaders I work with, yes, here in North America, Canada, the US, but in Brazil and South Africa and England and Australia and so many of the other places that I have been, this is just tragically too much the norm. And so I love coming back to this verse as a really significant milestone in our, I hope, refreshed vision for why the care of the soul matters. And so let's walk through it together. Jesus is saying this in Matthew 16. How could you possibly benefit if you gained the whole world but forfeit your soul? And what could you give in exchange for your soul? If you are like me in many of the evangelical contexts that spiritually I've been raised in, that's a verse that we would reference when we are making an evangelistic appeal. Don't live your life chasing after something other than God. The kingdom, why would you build a great career, but basically spend eternity in hell? Like, we would frame things like that. But it's a couple really important things. Two important things emerge from this text that I feel like we have to land before we get to the care of the soul, because I could give you guys great ways to care for your soul, but as long as it feels sort of optional and when you have nothing better else to do, it will never become a priority. And I hope to shift that perspective, and not just from the fear of burnout. What if there's an invitation to a way of life, the way God intended leadership and life to flow, and you're not so much afraid of making some huge moral failure that hits headlines. What if there's an invitation to something far greater? First thing to note from that passage, you can look it up in your own Bible if you want, is that Jesus is not talking in that question, that great rhetorical question. He's not talking to people who are far from him. This is not an evangelistic appeal as we would consider it today. He is posing that question to his disciples, not just the people who are following him around, his actual disciples. He is saying to them and to us, how could you possibly benefit if you gained the whole world but forfeited your soul? Or what could you give in exchange for your soul? And we actually don't really have a context for that, because if I'm saved, then my soul is technically good. I don't have the end of conversation. But that raises the second thing I want us to point to. The second thing is, and you can again see this in a text note, most Bibles, the word for soul in the Greek there is suke, P-S-U-C-H-E. Suke, how could you benefit if you gained the whole world but forfeited your suke? Or what could you give in exchange for your suke? Very interesting. Most Bible translators use that same word suke in the verse prior to verse 26, which is where we are. In verse 25, that same word suke is translated life. Jesus saying to his disciples, and we more readily recognize this as a discipleship focused question. If you would gain your suke, your life, you must lose it. But if you lose your life, your suke, for my sake, you will find it. And how could you benefit if you gain the whole world but forfeited that same life, suke? From a biblical perspective, guys, in the New Testament, as well as in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word was nephesh. Both in the ancient and well, all of them ancient texts, the Old Testament and New Testament, the biblical concept, the biblical notion of soul, of suke, of nephesh, is that it is the thing that integrates all the dimensions of your life, your personhood, your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your will, even your body to some extent, your relationships, your social context is what Dallas Willard referred to it as in Renovation of the Heart. And if you want a great book on the soul, Renovation of the Heart is fabulous. But the soul is the thing, biblically understood, the soul is the thing created in the image of God that holds all those dimensions together. And when the soul is not so well, even saved, when the soul is not doing well, all those dimensions start to become symptomatic. How our mind is functioning, how our body is functioning, how our relationships are showing up, how our thoughts are being organized or not. All those dimensions of your personhood and mine are going to go well or not so well, depending on how it is with our soul. And this is why it's so important for us to recover a broader understanding of soul, is because if your soul is just this like Jesus bumper sticker that gets slapped with a I'm saved kind of bumper sticker and enters the pearly gates and nothing else about you matters at salvation, then by all means burn out on your way to helping as many people as get saved as possible, right? But that is not the picture of life with God that we've been invited into. There is a much bigger story afoot here. The soul at salvation, yes, has become regenerate, has had new life, like the valley of the dry bones. New life has been breathed into us. But like any other living thing, your soul can have a quality of life. It can be doing well or not so well. And that's the piece that has largely been missing. And when the soul's doing well, and I've done a lot of work with this with groups, when the soul, there's utterly predictable symptoms of how the soul is when it's sort of plugged in to the real-time experience of God, not just thoughts about God, but real-time connection with God. A soul that is alive to God is how I kind of think about it. When your soul is alive to God, you have compassion that flows out of you. You have joy. The fruit of the Spirit flows, not because it's forced, but because it is just coming out of you. Your contentment increases, your confidence, your boldness, your courage, all these things just flow from a life deeply connected to God. But on the flip side, when we lose our sense of connection with God, now God obviously never goes away, but when we lose our sense of connection with God, utterly predictable symptoms of what I call soul neglect. It's benign neglect, nobody means for it, but soul neglect, we start to get defensive and blamey and judgy, and we get cloudy thinking or apathetic. We have physical symptoms, any number of things. We just start to not do so well. A great Dallas Willard quote I'll share with you on this. Let me share the screen on this. Is this? He says, fundamental aspects of life, such as sleep. Wait, which I missed one here. Art, sleep, sex, ritual, family meaning roots, parenting, community, health, and meaningful work. Like, what a wide-ranging group of things are all in fact soul functions, and they fail and fall apart to the degree that soul diminishes. Have you ever thought of the well-being of your soul as the thing to address when your relationships get a little goofy, or when your creativity starts to falter? Often we go and try to solve that thing. Well, how do I amp up my creativity? How do I learn better communication skills? How do I, and all those things might be important, but they all are ultimately functions of your soul. And if you don't ever get to the point of restoring life to your soul, those things will continue to fail and fall apart. And it's vital to recognize that even as people who are in Christ, as leaders, we have the capacity for our soul's health to be diminished. And that's why it matters that we learn to care for our soul. Again, Willard writes that when we speak of the human soul, we're speaking of the deepest level of life and power in the human being. And again, in leadership contexts, we might not talk about it or think about it this way. We think, oh, my strategic planning is the deepest level of life and power, or my persuasion capabilities as a preacher or a vision casting leader, that's the deepest level of life and power in me. But friends, I'm here to tell you, none of those. You might be really skilled and talented at those. Those are not the deepest level of life and power in you. It's your soul. It's your soul and your soul's well-being, your soul's real-time connection to the God of the universe. One last quote from Dallas. I love this. He says, our soul is like an inner stream of water, which gives strength, direction, and harmony to every other element of our life. When that stream is as it should be, we are constantly refreshed and even exuberant in all we do, because our soul itself is then profusely rooted. Think about a tree, profusely rooted, not just sort of connected, profusely rooted in the vastness of God and his kingdom, including nature, and all else within us is enlivened and directed by that stream. Oh, here's that quote from Henry Nouwen. This is the reality we're in, that nothing conflicts with the love of Christ like service to Christ. You can go back to this another time if you're interested, but Janet Hagberg, a great writer about spiritual formation and the critical journey, also wrote a book called Real Power. And in it, at the end, she starts to identify the kind of things that emerge from people who lead from a healthy soul. This is a really good list. I'm not going to read through it all, but you might want to get familiar with this at some point. It's pretty compelling. Those are the kinds of things that we can expect when we are living from soul health. So I wanted to go today into an area of talking about a couple different, I think my slides are a little out of sequence here. Hold on a second, let me get them right. About a couple different ways to care for your soul, right? What would those look like? First, I think I want to, let me see if I still have time. Oh, I've got tons of time. You ready? Brooks, I'm going for it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
want you guys, like how many people? We still got 15 with us. All right, guys, you didn't give up on us. Oh, I should have said I'm pretty interruptible if you have any questions. But I want to have, I'm going to put up a QR code and it'll lead to a quick little assessment that sort of gives you the various symptoms of soul health or soul neglect that I've seen, again, over decades of doing that exercise with people in groups large and small all over the place. And you'll be able to pull up your phone on and let the camera recognize the URL, and it'll take you to a little assessment. It doesn't take long to do. And it'll say at the end, you know, we're calculating your results, whatever. That's just a standard part of the tool that we're using. And it won't give you a, hey, I'm a squirrel kind of result, but what it will do is lead you to a reflection exercise that I want you to take a few minutes just reflecting on, like, the questions in the survey will get you thinking, but then it'll cause you to get this guide and be like, okay, what's true of me today? Wherever you are, California, Quebec, Zimbabwe, other places as well. Love to have you do this. So we just lost 4 more people. Everybody's terrified of this. All right, so we're going to go for it. You ready, guys? This is what you want to put up your phone and grab this little assessment, and it'll lead to a guide. If anyone has trouble getting to the guide, go ahead and say so in the chat, and we can get it to you somehow. But I have a follow-up screen that will just show the questions. But I want to take some time. We're going to give some breathing space. Go ahead, use that. It'll lead to that question. You're using your phone. Okay, that makes a little bit of a challenge. I was going to mention that if that was true of anyone. Karen, give me a second. I'm going to figure out how to send this to Brooks probably, and then he can put it in the chat so that you can keep seeing this screen. Has everyone gotten a chance to see that? Brooks, do you think I need to leave this up here?
I think we should be okay.
Okay, good. I'm going to stop my share, and then I'll go find that URL, and then Brooks will be able to send it to you. Let's see here. But rest of you, go ahead and just complete this. And, oh, this has happened before, so I had it right there in the slide. I'm just going to put it in chat for everybody. This will take you straight to the entire. Karen, let us know if you can get it through the chat. I hope that works for you. Yeah, great. Good. Well, I'm going to let it be quiet while you guys are doing this. But I'll share my screen again and get it to the, because you're focused on the questions right now, but I'll share my screen and get it to the sets of questions to do afterwards. And we're not going to take 15 minutes. We're going to take about 5. Let me change that. All right, well, I think we should just keep moving here. You guys, just for heaven's sake, and I mean that in the most delightful sense, for all of heaven's sake, please do take maybe a little bit more time later today, or whenever today is for you, this evening, this morning, to more deeply reflect on those questions. In my view, there's almost nothing more important for you to pay attention to than the well-being of your soul. I have a slide about this at the end, but we all know the writer of Proverbs advises us above all else to guard our heart, guard our inner life, guard that soul, that person, because from it flows everything. And the connection between all those symptoms that sit at the surface and the deeper inner reality of the well-being of our soul is that very thing, that you have to guard the well-being of your soul, because from it comes all these other things. And sadly, in many ministry contexts, the well-being of your soul has not been a top priority. And you feel like, how do I have time for that? If there's one more crisis after another, how do I do this? And I've talked to a lot of people, again, who are serving in really difficult circumstances, that, pastoral circumstances for sure, but others who are serving in relief and development organizations out on the front lines in some very, very, very dangerous places. And if the idea of caring for your soul means that you have some sort of luxury, afternoon with nothing better to do, that's never going to happen. That cannot be what it means to care for your soul. How do we find a way of life that's deeply integrated into your actual demands of life and leadership, that can breathe life and healing into your own soul? And I feel like that's where we have got to get to if we're going to see a reversal of the significant, deep, what I would say characterize as deep unhealth in the body of Christ among leaders. And guys, it can start with you. Like it can start right where you're sitting, right in the room that you're sitting in. It can start with you. So let's just run through a couple of ways to care for your soul that I have found helpful in the context of leadership and practices that kind of hold us in these uncertain times. This is a high-level framework. We'll get into some specific practices in a minute, but I have found this to be extremely helpful for my own sake and for leaders who say to me, Mindy, what's the one thing? What do I need to do? What's just tell me one thing I need to do, which of course, something this nuanced and complex cannot usually be reduced into one just thing. But here is one framework that I will stand by. If you want to be living from a healthy soul, you've got to figure out how to have these three things be part of your life. And they don't have to take gads of time, but you need a page, a person, and a plan. Anybody can remember that. You need a page, a person, and a plan. And I don't generally give into alliteration, but this one sort of just happened of its own. So apologies. A page, what I mean by that is you need a place, an invitation for self-reflection. One of the worst things that happens with us in leadership is we get so busy, we don't even know how we're doing. We don't pause long enough to say, Spirit, what are you saying to me? We don't pause and think, gosh, I just really reacted in a crazy way to that person. What's that about? What's going on inside? Or no, even take time to notice, I feel anxious right now. My shoulders are all hunched up. My forehead is all, whatever. We don't attend. We don't pay attention to what's going on in our own lives. So for me, many years running, that has happened in the pages of a journal. I've got 8,000 kinds of journals. I've just whatever. And even if you burn it and you don't want anybody to ever read it, I heard that the Puritans did that back in the day. So whatever you need to do, take time. And there is actual neuroscience around why there's benefit to physically writing things down. It doesn't, again, need to take 45 minutes every day, but pulling out a journal on occasion. What is rambling on in your own head? What is going on in your heart and soul? take some time to reflect. And if you can, write it down in a journal. Even if you're just noticing anxiety, I've done this at times, and I don't even have a thing to write on. And I just find a scrap of paper. I've used napkins at restaurants, just pulled out a pen and just allow what's going on in your head to come out on a piece of paper. Doesn't need to take hours, doesn't have to be every day, but find space in your life for reflection. Second P, the page, is a person. Now, what do I mean by this? I believe one of the real reasons there has been such deep unhealth in the leadership in churches and ministries is because of how isolating leadership can be. And I firmly believe, guys, that if we're going to stay alive to God, if we are going to keep our souls alive, staying connected to God, staying in a place of health, you've got to have at least one person with whom you can be completely honest. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Maybe it's a network like this new one that's coming together with Brooks and everyone else here. There are other networks that exist. Sometimes you have to go outside of your own network to find a place that feels like it's got confidentiality. This could be a therapist, it could be a coach, it could be a spiritual director, it could be one of the folks on our team, it could be somebody that lives down the street from you, but who is a safe third place, not your work, not your family, a third space to process the stuff of life and leadership. And again, there's a tremendous amount, a growing body of neuroscience around this as well. It is vital for us to be with people who are for us. And in ministry, you can feel like you don't have a long list of those kinds of people. And I am very sympathetic to that. And I would also say, if you are in that place, consider it of being alone and isolated, and it could be physically you're serving in remote parts of our world. I get it. Please use virtual ways to get with people who can hear your heart, who can understand the challenges you're facing, and who can be with you in it, who aren't fixing anything. They can just hold that space of connection. It's vital that we find those places. So a page, a person, and the last is this idea of a plan. Like, this can get into the idea of, I think every, you may have heard of the idea of a rule of life. It's a great spiritual practice, personal rule of life. Usually they were, a community came together around a rule of life, but a personal rule of life can be beneficial. But most leaders I know have very unruly lives. And so you have to find new ways of anchoring structure into your life that supports growth. The rule word in the Latin regula used to be referred to as a trellis, right? So the idea of a trellis that holds plant life and allows it to grow up and either fruit or flower in a certain way. That's the vision here, is whatever that structure is that holds your life and allows it to flourish, to blossom more fruit, as it were. Those, the structure isn't the growth. The structure isn't the life. It's just a structure. But when you have a structure, a routine, a rhythm, as much as you are capable of it in your current circumstances, not legalistic, not weird, not mechanical, but intention. What is my intended structure of, like, for example, there's a practice that I have that I call it my daily prayer of surrender. It doesn't take time. I might remember to pray it before I even get out of bed. I might remember while I'm driving the kids to school. I might remember at the very tail end of the day. But I don't like stop everything I'm doing. It's just, how do I have a structure that reminds me every day to re-surrender this day to God, re-surrender myself to God? It's almost transactional and very important for my soul, and I think for many leaders. So that's what I mean by structure that supports and exists within the busy life, the unruly life of a leader. So a page, a person, and a plan. Our team loves working with folks to help them come up with soul care plans. That might be something you or your organization might be interested in. But the last ones I want to bring to you are some ways of prayer. And I'll just kind of explain this one, and you'll have this for your notes in the future. And then the second one, we're going to actually take time and do together. And then the third one, I'll just explain as well. But you'll have all three of these as ways to care for your soul in uncertain times. Inward prayer is, Brother Lawrence, I think, talked about practicing the presence of God. Other people have written about it in other ways. But I love his words around what he calls inward prayer. And again, this doesn't have to take any of your time, because the whole idea is this is the consummate multitasking prayer expression, that in the middle of your daily life, you're also cultivating the capacity to operate on two levels at once. So let me read this quote in a book called A Testament of Devotion, which I definitely recommend. It's fabulous. He says, there's a way of entering our mental life on more than one level at once. On one level, we may be thinking, discussing, seeing, calculating, meeting all the demands of external affairs. But deep within, behind the scenes, at a profounder level, we may also be in prayer and adoration, song and worship, and a gentle receptiveness to divine breathings. So the idea that you're always attuned to things that God may be speaking or saying in the midst, or encouraging you with in the midst of daily life. He goes on to say the secular world of today, but I think sometimes the ministry world of today, values and cultivates only the first level, assured that that's where the real business of mankind is done. Like that's where you're making your plans and doing the things. And then our culture might sort of scorn or smile in amusement at the cultivation. That's key. It's not like you're good at it or bad at it. No, nobody's good at it. We all cultivate it. Cultivating this second level. And they say, maybe it's just a vestige of superstition or whatever, but in a deeply spiritual culture, people know that this deep level of prayer and divine attendance or divine paying attention is the most important thing in the world. It's this deep level that the real business of life is determined. And so guys, what I want you to think about is, like, as you think of your day ahead or the day behind you or tomorrow, like, where is there a meeting that you're in that you have to lead, or an opportunity to, whatever you do, in the midst of that doing, can you imagine yourself also staying attentive to what is God saying to me right now? What is he saying to these people? How am I receiving words of encouragement from God as I'm in the middle of my doing? Guys, I think this is one of the keys to recovering the health of our souls in the midst of a very disruptive time. We can develop our capacity for this. All right, the second way, and I just call it silent prayer. Different traditions have different ways of talking about this, but as it was introduced to me, this was the definition. And it was sort of inspired by Psalm 131 and verse 2 of saying, I've stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child in its parent's lap is what the rest of the verse says. But this way of prayer is a wordless way of resting in the presence of God with an attitude of openness, contrition, and longing. And, for when I was first introduced to this, I was told to advise to do this for like 20 minutes each day. And that felt like a long and impossible thing. But I began giving it a try because I became persuaded that this was such a valuable goal, that having a silent permission giving to the inner workings of the Holy Spirit in my own life was vitally important. So when we give that silent permission to God, the Holy Spirit can move in at a level below words to shape and reshape who we are at the core of our being. So we're going to take just a few minutes now. I'm going to give us 3 minutes, and everybody, no matter where you are in the world, I want you to just, I'll set a timer. You don't need to worry about the time, but I want you to just get quiet, maybe close your eyes. And I'll call us back after these 3 minutes. But what I want you to do is just, enter into a practice of letting the water, sort of the turbulence of your mind, all the thoughts, the ideas, the questions, song lyrics, anything that's entering your mind, just let it get quiet. But imagine this, that you are very much in a Trinitarian way of being with God right now. So let's enter into some silence together. Oh, my little slides are being a little finicky here. Starting now, and I'll call us back. Maybe take a deep breath to get started. Let your shoulders get still. All right, guys, if I could call us back. First of all, how was that? If anybody wants to chime in, was it hard to be quiet? Did you find your body was still holding tension even when you were asking your mind to be quiet? It's kind of a counterintuitive way of prayer. We think of prayer as usually as the words we're saying to God or hearing from God, but to have a wordless way of resting. I have to say, of all the practices that have been embedded into my life and experience these many years, this has been one that has held me through many seasons of difficulty and trial. And it's just a silent way of letting your body, your mind, your soul rest in God's presence. Super healing. Last thing I want to introduce to you as a way of caring for your soul. This is another form of prayer, but all of prayer basically just brings us back to that language of our relationship with God. This is a form of journaling that gets interactive with you listening. And again, you can kind of look at these after the fact, But particularly when it comes to something that every leader deals with is when it comes to loving our enemies. And, sometimes enemies aren't people that are pointing weapons at us necessarily. They are sometimes people who cause our minds to go into a defensive mode. It could be your elder board can feel like an enemy, or your child or your spouse, or anything that sort of triggers that state of mind when we're defending ourselves rather than being open. And we function best when we're open, when we're sort of relationally at ease, and we start to sort of malfunction a little bit when we are in that defended, highly defended place. And some of us have been in that defended place for a very long time. But this, I would say, is one of the ways to allow your mind and your soul to start interacting with God about something that has triggered that defensive reaction in you. And this has been another very important practice in leadership, because we're going to have people that we feel threatened by, and maybe it's a real threat, maybe it's invented, it doesn't almost matter. The point is we're training our souls to go back to God interactively. It's why it's called Emmanuel journaling. It's God with us journaling, and asking God a series of questions, reflecting on these questions has been key for me. So ideally you read your responses to someone else, but even if you just do this between you and the Lord, that's super valuable. So friends, above all else, is just my last slide, just to remember to guard your heart, anchor and live your life around the well-being of your soul. Might feel like a big risk. Could God really be true enough, good enough to meet you and sustain you and guide you from a place of deep soul health? I would challenge you to take him at his word and see what happens. Anyway, Peyton, that's all I have today. Is there, or not Peyton, sorry, Brooks. I was looking at Peyton's name. Brooks, is there anything else you have for us today, or anybody has any questions? You can reach me at M Caliguire, my first initial last name, at soulcare.com. Great email for you to reach out. Happy to stay connected with you. And Karen, you're most welcome. Delighted you are joining us. And I hope this will be beneficial to you. Any way that I or our team or the resources on the website, there's lots of free downloads. Just head over to soulcare.com and take a look around and see if we can be supportive to your journey. But wherever you are in this world, wherever you are, my prayer, our team's prayer for you, is that you would increasingly be living out of a place of soul health. Not judging yourself if you're unhealthy today, so be it. But take one tiny step toward reconnecting with God. It doesn't need, you don't need a 5-year PhD in spiritual formation. And nothing wrong with that, but you don't need it. Just like you're a swimmer that was breathing, just take your head out of the water and breathe. Let God meet you in that place. Godspeed, friends.
Thank you so much for joining us today and walking us through how to actually practically care for our souls. And folks, again, Mindy mentioned it, but check out soulcare.com. There's tons of great resources. There's the Soul Care Collective, which is a free online community.
Yeah, I forgot that.
We thought it was so great, we stole the idea at NewBreed.
Good. Yeah, no, let me say that we have an online virtual community, and we do a once a month semi-silent retreat every Saturday. We've had people from all over the world join us. It's totally free. When you join the collective, you'll see the next one, I think, is May 6th or whatever the first Saturday in May is. But it's every Saturday. We just walk through some reflection exercises, a longer time frame than what we had today. Love to support you and your organizations in whatever way we can. Most of our work just sits at this intersection of leadership and spiritual formation. And the world needs you guys at full capacity, full strength, not out of powering up to it, but out of yieldedness, surrender, and connection to the living God. That's the source of your life. So Godspeed, friends. Take good care. I hope Peyton and Andrea are doing well.
Yeah.
Blessings over them. And Brooks, always delightful to partner with you in any way I can. So take good care.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And guys, if you're, this is just day 1 of 3 days. So join us again, 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Peyton and Andrew will be back with Barry Waters. We'll be talking about disciple making. It's kind of the next building block of being an adaptive leader. So thank you for joining us today.